Good morning. Welcome to Crisis in Flint, Michigan. My name is Richard Hairston. I want to thank you for joining me today. We are more than at the advantage with great legal minds with us today, um, as per usual. As per usual, in most cases, can I qualify that?
Ooh, why
Um,
take one day out of 365?
Dr. Deidre Wilcoxon is here with us today, and my goodness, we've been joined by and its former Chief Judge
Former Chief Judge, that's correct.
Kenneth King.
Yes, sir.
Thank you so much. Thank you for taking the time because I know you got a busy schedule. I know that you are doing some. Is it seminars? Is it some training today, or
Well,
what is it?
actually, I'm speaking at Ecorse High School graduation.
Okay. Oh my
That's
goodness.
why I'm wearing the red.
Okay.
It's not Valentine's Day.
Can you leak to us maybe a little of what your message would be today?
My message is going to be perfecting your brand.
My,
Ooh.
my goodness, we've been seeing a lot of branding doing this year, and I guess the national political race. I think one person has been doing most of the branding, though, and I speak of Donald Trump. But thank you so much for being here. Uh, just a little bit more. I mean, what will you give them? What would be the sort of roadmap to where they can have an idea of identifying who they are and where they want to go.
Well, the thing is, our Ecorse High School students are pretty much like our Detroit High School students. It's predominantly African American,
Yes.
and we have been beaten down so
Mhm.
much. And I just want to give some uplift to them and to let them know that they can do all things through God who strengthens them.
Ooh.
And don't turn back, don't give up, don't feel bad about yourself or where you come from. That I want to give them a message of hope.
and and it's really so important. I guess we talk about it every week when you look at what has happened to the residents in Flint. The continuous assault on Detroit public schools, um, by way of how about this as a brand, Amway and the DeVos family. Um, but the idea that you can even um, transcend and overcome all of that in order to accomplish what you will, that still is a possibility. And I think inherent in your message most Wednesdays, Dr. Wilcoxon,
Ooh.
it's really that, isn't it?
I like to think so,
And,
Richard.
and I'm talking about what surrounds these children. The focus on the schools, buckled gym floors,
Mm-hmm.
um, growing mold.
Mm-hmm.
You have a Michigan legislature now that wants to pass legislation that says certified teachers
Mm-hmm.
will no longer be required.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Um, but your message has been something to the contrary, to the extent that they have that within themselves to overcome all of that.
They do. The unfortunate part of the equation is that our children, despite our best efforts, generation after generation after generation, we have to fight the same battles.
Mm.
No other community has to fight the same battles. The Italians that came here, the oh God, what
Irish,
ethnicity? The Polish women who came here. Polish women came here in large part, initially, they were the prostitutes of the United States. I
mm,
have some great Polish friends who tell me great stories. But each one of these communities gets to fight their battles in America and then go on and be Americans. They get to access the American dream. They get to make certain that doors are not closed to them. And unfortunately for us, every generation is fighting a new battle, whether it is black code or Jim Crow or segregation or um, um, the next employment, I think, was to import drugs into our
mm.
community, and then to come in now and rip apart our schools and siphon off our assets. This, in my estimation, has to stop. We have to get to a point wherein the respect of the African American community is just as real in America as it is in any other community. You know that I've made the argument consistently that democracy cannot be democracy in Livonia, but it's not democracy in Detroit, but yet the United States is a democratic country.
Yes.
That cannot happen. We cannot have two differing playing fields, if you will, in this country and say that we are a country of greatness. I think Lyndon Baines Johnson said it best. He said, "You cannot unshackle a man, take him up to the start line of a race, and say that you've been fair when he runs along with the rest of the runners. It's not fair. And we can no longer say that America is great until all of America is great. So I think it's wonderful, Judge, because I followed your history in terms of the strength that you brought to the bench so far. And I know that you are aspiring to a position at Third Circuit Court, and being in Third Circuit Court more often than I've wanted to be, it's not a very pleasant place. There is not enough of an African American presence there. All of the defendants that we see across this county by way of defendants in criminal cases are African American for the most part. You go into circuit court and you see all of the large victories being won by people who are not of color. You see all of the juries being filled with people who are not of African descent. And I know for a fact, because we've interviewed some of the jurors after cases, they go into these jury rooms with one or no African Americans in the jury pool, and the sentiment is that, well, you know, we have to rule in favor of the insurance company, because if we don't, our insurance rates are going to go up, and God forbid
Really?
that these
That's
African
interesting.
Americans get a large settlement. But the reality of it all is that, and I'm so pleased at where we are right now in our country from a political standpoint, because we have people finally saying to the 99%, to the 1% rather, enough already. We want to be respected. We want to access the American dream. We want to participate in the political process. And we know that you have wronged us. So people are standing up for themselves now. So I think we are at a wonderful point in our history wherein we can change the mindsets of large numbers of people.
Well, we should state that Hillary Clinton is the nominee of a major party, first female, presumptive nominee. 50 years after Indira Gandhi
Yes.
in India. How many years since Golda Meir in Israel? I guess we're kind of catching up. But the reason that I wanted to talk about part of your message today, because I have a sense that you relate to these young people.
I do, and I like to touch on what she just
Please
said
do.
about our representation on the court, in Third Circuit Court. Our numbers are dwindling at an alarming rate because you can't run past the age of 70 to be a judge. Our African American judges, most of which came from Recorder's Court, are retiring, and they're being replaced by Governor Snyder appointees who are not African American. He's appointed one African American in the 5 years that he has been governor. That one African American has been appointed to Third Circuit Court. He's made 32. He's made 32 appointments to circuit courts throughout the state of Michigan. Not one has gone to an African American male. One has gone to an African American female. And the vast majority of the people who come through our circuit court, whether it be criminal or civil, are African American people. And like you said, our juror pool does not reflect our dynamics either. And so I'm looking to strike a balance. 36th District Court has been good to me. I have no issue with my tenure there. My tenure in 36th District Court, my term does not end until 2020. So
wow.
many people ask, why are you doing this now? Why do you do it anyway? Because there's not much of a money difference. It's more of a headache because there's 44 cities that I'm accountable for,
Sure.
you know, as it relates to just being the city of Detroit. And so why? Because I'm not getting home to 10 o'clock every night, campaigning. It's very expensive.
Mm-hmm.
There's 20 other people in this race with me, and we're all vying for 4 seats. So why are you putting yourself through this? I'm doing it because I have a moral obligation and a duty to at least try to strike a balance in some kind of way, to have someone there who lives in our community, who represents our community, and understands the law, is competent. I've been a judge for half my legal career, for 10 years now. Time really goes by fast. But I'm looking forward to it, and
But it's just so important when you talk about the need to have that representation, and maybe a sort of real understanding of what justice means. See, because I have a sense that maybe in Livonia, as it relates to black people, justice represents something else than it
well,
does.
I must admit that I've grown in my 10 years as a judge because I came out of the Wayne County Prosecutor's Office.
Sure.
I was a prosecuting attorney. And if you're not careful, you can get caught in the mindset of conviction, conviction, conviction. That stands
My
for
goodness.
justice, that stands for winning. And that's not necessarily so because justice is righting injustice because I have a fair number of people that come before me that should not be charged for whatever reason. You know, the prosecutor's office, they do a very good job in doing what it is that they do. They play with the hand that they're dealt. Sometimes it's a good hand, sometimes it's not. Sometimes they've been led astray, whether it's a police officer who says something happened that didn't happen, or whether it's a citizen who says something happened that did happen. So
You actually have to run that through your sieve, so to speak, that all of those elements and contingencies.
and this is where me being who I am
Okay.
um, works to my benefit, coming from the community and using most of what I do is common sense. You know, if something isn't adding up, if I have an opportunity to right a wrong, I'm going to take every opportunity to do that. And so I have young folk that come before me. For instance, I had a 19-year-old kid who was driving in his mother's car, and he had a defective tail light. He was pulled over by a state trooper. State trooper told him to roll his window down. He rolled it halfway down, and he said, "I have my driver's license, my proof of insurance, and my registration." Trooper felt disrespected. "I told you to roll your window down." "I have everything. I told you to roll it down." And so this goes on for a period of time until the trooper busts out the window, drags the kid out the car, and arrests him for resisting and obstructing a police officer. Now, this case comes to me, and
Thank God.
I'm like, wow, but the first thing I do is I put myself in that kid's shoes. In light of everything that's been going on around the country
That's
with
right.
police officers and our young African
He quite
American males
possibly
and so
was
forth.
very
Yeah,
afraid.
this is 12 o'clock at night. You have a very sizable Caucasian trooper
Meaningful.
who's getting angrier by the moment because you're not following his orders, and then things escalate from there. Now, I'm not saying that that trooper was racist or anything like that. You know, our police officers have a very difficult job, and that's what I tell people when I go to our young people when I go to talk to them. That when an officer tells you to do something, do exactly what they tell you to do. If you feel that you're being wrong or singled out or anything like that, that is not the point to take it up with them. Take it up with their superiors, or let your parents know, contact a lawyer, whatever it is, but you're not going to win that confrontation on the street. And so I ultimately dismissed that case because I didn't find that that the trooper had probable cause to do anything beyond the traffic stop, especially since he had all of his information and so forth. But those are the kinds of things that make my job feel, makes me feel in my job that I'm doing what I'm sent here to do. You know, and that's not to just be a rubber stamp to the police or the prosecution, and that's not to say that I'm letting everybody go either. You know, for 20 years now, I've been fighting to keep our community safe. and I'm committed to doing that. But at the same time, that doesn't mean that everybody comes before me goes to jail either. That's why I have to listen to the evidence that's brought before
What
me.
our system of jurisprudence provides for men and women on the bench, fortunately or unfortunately, is the element of discretion. And you can use that discretion based on your experiences, and another person sitting hearing the same fact pattern can use their discretion, and you can have a totally different outcome.
Absolutely.
And so when we look at justice in our system, and people say, well, why are black people always convicted? Why do black people get the larger sentences? Why doesn't the judge seem to be listening to the facts that are in favor of the black person's issue? And they say, well, justice in our country is no good, and Lady Justice is not blind. She's actually peeping from behind that blindfold. She isn't. Our justice can work for everybody the same way if we had judges using their discretion in the same way. But if you want to look at maintaining a system that is revenue generating, unfortunately, that is a huge element of our system of jurisprudence. And if we could take the element of revenue generation out of the mix, in a lot of instances, we would have a great many outcomes that would be different. But because we have the issue of revenue involved, and you give a judge discretion, just like you had the state trooper on the street. The state trooper had discretion to say, young man, I ask you to roll your window down. I did not mean for you to roll it halfway down. I intended for you to roll it all the way down. So let's start again. Roll your window down. So the young man goes and rolls the window all the way down. No confrontation, no escalation. But the discretion that he had gave him the ability to tack on additional charges: resisting arrest, obstructing justice, all these other claims that he can pull out of his bag. And the kid doesn't know that he has this one discretion, and two, all of these other things that he can charge him with, and how these things can escalate if they are not handled properly. So I think you're right in terms of advising our children, and you come from their background, at least in part. So you can take your experiences and tap your experiences into that discretion that the law
And
gives you.
that's very important. It's very important. And another important part or point that you bring up is how everything is economically driven, even as it relates to me being a judge in the state court system. In the federal court system, those judges are appointed, and they have lifetime appointments. So there are no pressures on them to rule in a certain way for certain people or those types of things. Attorneys that come before us, because let's be quite frank, as I'm running for election, who do you think that I depend on to help fund my campaign? Other attorneys, not citizens. Citizens don't know who I am. Citizens don't come before me. So those attorneys always look for something in return. And that's not to say that I give them something in return, or that you feel a certain way as they stand before you, because I try to be straight down the middle as much as I possibly can. But when you have those kinds of variables in play, that you have to depend on people to fund your campaign and that type of thing, then that leaves room for some funny business to go on. I would be disingenuous in saying that I don't believe it goes on. I don't know what other judges do. I'm not in their courtrooms, but I can tell you what I do, which is try to stay straight down the middle. And I think people respect me for that. I try to rule as I see fit, rule according to the evidence and so forth, and not according to who the parties are and that type of thing. So that keeps me out of trouble.
But you have an experiential level that perhaps allows you to be a bit more fair. Maybe there's something, what is Solomonic about being able to not only seek justice, but find a way that maybe society also benefits in the process of how people will come to, I guess, some kind of conclusion regarding those problems. We have a number of people on the line. Again, you are running in 3rd District Court.
I'm a
Third
36th
Circuit.
District Court judge
Right
running for
now.
Third Circuit Court.
Just before we go to the phone lines, what is the scope of what the third district court deals with?
Third Circuit.
Third circuit. I'll get it right.
All
I'm
right.
listening to these attorneys
More
and
coffee, more
judges
coffee.
and
Well, the difference between the two courts is 36th District Court is what we call our people's court. Pretty much anything that happens in the city of Detroit comes through 36th District Court first, whether it be landlord-tenant cases, misdemeanors, traffic, which is by far our largest docket,
Sure.
and criminal felonies. But we don't do the trials for the felonies. We only do the preliminary examinations, which is where I'm assigned. So I determine if we have the right defendant, the right evidence for it to move on to the next level, which is circuit court. Circuit court is where all of our big decisions are made, whether it be the trials and sentencing of defendants, the big money lawsuits, because 36th District Court does civil lawsuits too, but only up to $25,000. Beyond $25,000 goes to the circuit court. Circuit Court also does our family law, juvenile. They have a criminal division which does the trials and the sentencing, and the civil division which does the civil suits over $25,000.
We'll take some of your questions. We don't have the judge. I guess about another 15 minutes, is it? Or it's about 7:25 now.
Richard,
Just let us know when
could I make one additional point?
Would you please?
You and I have been talking a great deal about the optics of what is happening in the city of Detroit from a racial perspective, and I don't think that we can adequately confront history without confronting the fact that the city of Detroit has become white at its top and black at its bottom. And if I could use the Detroit Public Schools, for instance, we have Judge Rhodes as emergency manager, who is white. We have Ms. Merriweather as superintendent, who is white. We have the governor controlling both of them, who is white. And our children are going through, they're matriculating through a system that does not give them at the very highest levels of their education any black people to associate themselves with. And in my estimation, it is extremely important for all of us. It's important for kids in Livonia to see white people at the top. It's important for black kids in the city of Detroit to see black kids at the top. One of the things that we know based on available research is that black men are sorely missing in our schools. They're sorely missing in our courts. They're sorely missing in our community. So when we look at what goes wrong in a child's life, a black child's life, especially a black male, a great deal of it has to do with the fact that he has not interfaced with enough competent, high-ranking black men in his lifetime. So there's a push in some areas in the country to bring more black males into schools. And I would suggest that that, by way of extension, should also be the case as it relates to Third Circuit Court. Because you go there and you don't see any black men, and it's as if, well, you know, are there any black men in the city of Detroit? Are there no black lawyers in the city of Detroit? It makes a difference in terms of the self-esteem of our children. It makes a difference in terms of their aspirations. I don't know that we will walk away from a President Barack Obama's administration and talk about so much how he changed the world. But we will be able to say that our children were able to say that we had a president look at the murder of Trayvon Martin and say, that could have been my son. If I had had a son, he would have looked like Trayvon Martin. It speaks volumes in terms of what our children need in order to complete themselves. There are a great many of people in the African American community who actually are proud to say they're black. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with saying you're black. It doesn't mean that you don't like Italians or Polish people. It simply means that you recognize the fact that God made you different. And there is nothing that you can say in opposition to what God has made. In my estimation, I'm a God-fearing woman. And so I think that we need to be proactive in our community in terms of elevating black men who are going to be able to say to black young men, Young blood, this is how it's done. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that. So I think that it's extremely important from the perspective of the optics that we advance some black men to Third Circuit Court.
Would like
Amen.
would like the opportunity to allow some of our callers, folks who are viewing us this morning. In fact, you're viewing us. I guess Detroit and another 30 some odd cities throughout Southeast Michigan, and to get a chance to really engage you at another level. Folks will get the opportunity to vote for you, and I'd like for them to talk with you directly.
All right.
Good morning, caller. You're on the air.
Yes, good morning.
You're on the air with Judge Kenneth King.
Yes, I'd like to welcome the judge to our struggle.
Good morning, sir.
And what I see to the guest and the host, I see a new twist to this racism. I see that for the first time in the history, there has been a collaboration with the black intelligentsia who happen to be preachers who helped with faith-based initiative, who helped dismantle the system with collaborating with starting with John Engler on up. And I've seen also a new twist. I've seen the city council collaborate with the state government to dismantle the city government. And now I heard the judge before said that now that they are under emergency manager, and they had the training in law, and they sit back and watch this happen. It reminds me of Germany. They came for the workers. I wasn't a worker. I did nothing. They came for the communists. I did nothing. And when they came for me, there was nobody to help me. So I think I'm saying the same thing here playing out.
Taryn, I want you to hold it just 1 second.
Okay.
Because you really deal with a class of individuals, if I can characterize it that way, who really can't be the wedge in some of these protest movements, or really man a bullhorn, so to speak. But I think you make an assumption that I'm not totally comfortable with. To say that these folks are not doing battle, I guess on their own beachhead, I think is not necessarily the case. We talked about in town. Hold on, we talked about the whole situation with how juries are assigned, for example, and the differences that have really developed in 36 District Court regarding that, I believe, as well as even this idea of, which I thought was extraordinary. You're talking about outlying communities being able to collect parking tickets, not parking tickets, but traffic tickets that were actually written in Detroit and being able to pay it through their own courts. And then those cities, well explain it, and the fact that you guys managed to fight that off.
Well, we did have a process in place during the end of my tenure as chief judge, where if you lived outside the city of Detroit and you received a ticket in the city of Detroit, that you could pay that city of Detroit ticket in your local district court. That local district court would then give 50% of the proceeds to Detroit and give all of the work to Detroit as far as putting input into the
but they did not subject their
forth.
citizens and their residents to have to come into Detroit and pay the bill where the violation occurred.
Correct. And if me living in Detroit got a ticket in, say, Dearborn, I couldn't pay that Dearborn ticket in the city of Detroit.
So with no reciprocity.
None. So that project has since been abandoned, and for good reason. I couldn't understand or wrap my mind around why we would do such a thing in a period of time when the city of Detroit needed money. Understand that all of the money that 36 District Court takes in, 36 District Court keeps none of it. It all goes to the city of Detroit. The city of Detroit is our funding unit, and they are also, they're our purse. They give us the money that we need to operate.
And they benefit.
So the ticket money that we receive, the fines, the costs, all of that goes to the city of Detroit. So city of Detroit at the time was going through a bankruptcy. Why then would we give 50% of any money that we're receiving to someone else? I couldn't understand that, especially since we had a collection agency that was a nationwide collection agency, nation-renowned collection agency, that partnered with the African American law firm here.
This
So,
makes all the sense in the
yeah,
world.
so our citizens wouldn't be abused by any collection processes or anything like that. And they were doing a very good job in collecting. They collected $4 million in 5 months. And they were getting 18 to 20% of the money that they brought in, which was standard around the country.
Sure.
But it also amounted to only the late fee. The court was getting the principal of the money that was collected. So, but still, you're looking at 18 to 20% versus 50%, and those numbers just didn't add up to me. And so I became a little boisterous about it. Ultimately, I was removed from Chief Judge's 36th District Court.
Perhaps as that being an element that was in consideration.
That, among other things, that I just refused to go along with.
Okay.
So,
This is
Was
also my
there-
characterization that you fight, that there are other beachheads, and we may not know about it, but there are folks and it is appropriate to say that was sort of fought off.
it was, it didn't make sense, and the numbers weren't adding up, and we weren't collecting at the rate that we needed to be or had been collecting at. So they respectfully backed off of that and said, oh, well, 36th District Court is stable enough now to where we're able to do our own collections.
And
we
Dr. Wilcoxon,
don't need others to help us anymore.
the allocation of the jury pool.
Let's go back to the issue of revenue sharing for just a minute.
Sure.
Was there not also a component to the revenue sharing imposition wherein a person could receive a ticket inside of the city of Detroit, and it's time to pay that ticket, but instead of paying the ticket in Detroit, they paid the ticket in, let's say, Pleasant Ridge, and their attorneys negotiated the fee that was charged
my
Detroit,
goodness.
so that instead of Detroit looking at this, let's just say for purposes of discussion that the ticket was $100. Detroit is expecting to collect $100, but an attorney representing the defendant in the case negotiates with a judge in Pleasant Ridge and says, you know, Judge, I was at your daughter's party last year, and
or whatever the case
my
may be.
client can't afford $100, so can we pay $50? And the judge says, okay, we pay $50. So Detroit,
After all the money's going to Detroit, right?
gets $25 as opposed to $50 that it was going to get, as opposed to the $100 that it was due. So mathematically, you can't win in those kinds of scenarios. And Detroiters have the compounded issue of driving while black to go and pay their tickets, and people of other ethnicities driving into the city of Detroit are not confronted with the same kinds of issues. I mean, I've said to the current mayor's administration, why is it that people sit on the south side of 8 Mile and they use their radar guns, and sometimes they are bold enough to even come and sit on Detroit side. They sit in Green Acres with their radar gun, and they only ticket Detroiters for the most part. All of the people they have lined up that they've stopped are black. You go into Ferndale to the court over there, and there's no one over there but black people except for the judge and the judge's staff. Everybody else is black. So these numbers and these scenarios that are painted are not accidental. They are by design. We're actually financing these small municipalities. But I said that to say that the information that I had received in my capacity as publisher of the Renaissance Observer was that you could actually negotiate these tickets. So
You're
if you could
absolutely
speak of, because I know that I've convoluted it for the listening and viewing
No,
audience.
you're right on, right on. That's exactly what was going on, and again, it didn't make any sense. I think that program went on for maybe a year, or maybe just short of a year, and it was ultimately abandoned.
Again, it's an example of some of these things being fought off. Tyrone, there's another example of even getting leftover jury pool allocation. I don't know if I hit the target on it, and maybe we'll talk about it. But Tyrone, finish your comment.
Yeah, I think what the other talked about that's a good example of the collaboration of the city council sitting there making a paycheck and allowing for and rubber stamping that process
And I think that may have come through the
dividing that money.
emergency
But I want to
manager
ask the judge this. Judge,
and roads.
you know, right now, the summer tax bill, when I looked at my summer tax bill, I'm paying 13 mills for the bond debt. Now they're going to repurpose the school operating fund, but without us having a vote. We're supposed to vote on that, but they're going to, the state constitution said we're supposed to vote on that. Now they're going to repurpose that to speed up as they create a new school district and destroy our school district. That all our tax money would be going paying off debt to the banks and finance institutions that they ran up.
Right.
I'd like you to use your expertise in law and join us in that struggle and look at the summer tax and see how they are repurposed against the state constitution and fight with us and help us in that manner.
Tom, I thank you so much.
Well, you know, I can only do as much as I can do, and I'm willing to do that. But we as a people have to do our part too, which is first and foremost, we have to get out to the polls. We have to stop sitting at home and letting these people get elected that's making decisions about us, making decisions about what it is that we can and cannot do. And one of the most important parts of the ballot is on the back of the ballot, and that's the judicial portion of the ballot, which most people just overlook. And it's very important, and I have evidence that it's important. My evidence that it's important is because there has always been, dating back to the civil rights movement, a concentrated effort to keep you from the polls. They erected poll taxes, literacy tests, all of those things. So if people are trying to keep you from voting, then there must be something to it. And the something to it is because that's where our power lies. That's why they got rid of the straight party ticketing, straight party voting.
That's right.
Because it's meant to frustrate you. It's meant to create long lines. They're going to pray for bad weather. Anything that they can do to keep you from going to the polls and exercising your right to vote. So, you know, on this campaign trail and getting people to sign my petitions and so forth, I ran across people who actually told me, oh, I don't vote, or my vote doesn't matter, and that type of thing. And I couldn't disagree with you more. It absolutely matters, particularly as it relates to the judicial portion, because we, at any given point in time, determine what your civil liberties are. We get to determine when our Detroit public school teachers have their sick outs, have they committed a crime, those kinds of things. And that's why I want to get to the circuit court, because we're underrepresented. We're underrepresented there as a people. We're underrepresented there in our community, period. And there needs to be some kind of balance. So it's partially our fault that we have people in places that get to make decisions about our welfare, that when we vote down the emergency manager law, we get it anyway. Well, how does that happen? That happens because we sat on our hands and we let people tell us that, oh, your vote doesn't matter, and we believe it and we sit home, and then they get elected, and then they determine policy, our civil liberties, and everything else.
Arguably, the nonpartisan part of the ballot is really the part that will impact our lives. I mean, we will engage a judge at some level. Many times, not just once or twice, but many times through the course of our lives. We want to take this last call, and Judge, we'll let you go. Okay. Maybe with the proviso that at some point you return.
Sure.
But good morning, caller. You're on the air. In fact, you're speaking with Judge Kenneth King, and he's also a candidate for the Third Circuit District Court.
Third Circuit Court.
Third Circuit Court. I'll get it right the third time. But yes, caller, you're on the air.
Good morning.
Good morning.
How are you?
Wonderful. Thank you for calling.
And to Miss Deetta Wisconsin, how are you today?
Good morning. How are you?
I'm doing fine. And to Judge Kenneth King, how are you doing?
Good morning. I'm fine. How are you?
I'm doing fine. Okay. To the judge, I thank you for coming on because you gave us some good information. How do we make a contribution to your campaign?
Oh, wow.
Well, I have my first fundraiser is June 16th at the Whittier from 5 to 9, and it's going to be a very nice affair. That's first and foremost. If you also want to contribute to my campaign, now don't let this email scare you. It's an old prosecutor email that I haven't changed in a long time. But you can contact me at hangman
Oh my.
0228 at yahoo.com.
Okay, you said hangman. Could you speak up a little bit because
Hangman.
I tell you what. Hold on. Let me just hang up, and you can repeat it because I'm going to have to hear it off the TV because I barely can see it.
I appreciate that. Thank you so much for your call. Let's
Okay,
see if we
bye-bye.
can get this last caller in. Good morning, caller. You're on the air with Judge Kenneth King.
Well, happy Wednesday to all of you.
Sounds like
there.
Theo
Good morning.
Groden. How are you this morning?
Fantastic. Have you covered Ruth Carter and the devastating effects of her leaving her office and Janice Winfrey and others not fighting to take her name off the ballot? So because of name recognition, if she gets elected, Snyder gets to appoint somebody. You know what I'm talking about?
I've heard you mention it, Theo, and I'm glad you're taking
It
this
can't
time
be
again.
mentioned enough. But Ruth Carter left the bench for a high-paying job or whatever. And her name is still on the ballot for August the 2nd. She's not going to accept it even by name recognition if she gets the highest votes, which means that her seat will be vacant.
And appointed, you
And
say.
your guest has emphasized the importance of voting. So we need not to vote for her. Do not vote for her. Because we do not want to help the governor of this state do us some more damage.
Theo, I always appreciate your call.
All
Thank
right, thanks.
you. Judge King, in closing, what would you leave us with today?
Well, just in response to the last caller, it is quite interesting that Judge Carter resigned, does not want to be a 36th District Court judge anymore, and resigned, I think, early enough because ballots aren't even printed
Oh, my.
to take her name off the ballot. But for whatever reason, and Judge Carter is a very good judge, a very popular judge, and could very well win without campaigning.
Name identification wins the day in many cases in Detroit and surrounding
That's how
areas.
voters base that's how they vote based on name recognition, and she could very well win that seat. And the caller is absolutely right. If that does in fact happen, then Governor Snyder will get to appoint a person to that seat. Now,
But it's a wasted vote. If you're voting for Ruth Carter, I'm going to call her Ruth Johnson. Ruth Carter, then it's a wasted vote.
it is, and it also because there are 8 or 7 other judges that are running to keep their seats, and there's also a non-judge that's running, Austin Garrett. And if Austin Garrett wins, Ruth Carter name wins, then one of those other incumbent judges loses to someone who has not even run.
Austin Garrett, a member of the first family of politics in Southeast Michigan, Al Garrett over at ASME, our beloved clerk,
Kathy Garrett.
Kathy Garrett. And now we have a second generation Austin.
We also have a state representative, Garrett, don't we?
You're telling me something, but what's
It's
most
Tanya
important?
Garrett.
Kenneth King is running.
Yes, I am.
And
I encourage all of you to do the right thing and
Go
vote for
to-
Judge King.
go to the non-partisan first, and look for King. Think
And here's-
about the King.
And the thing is that you're going to see some recognizable names, but understand that you need to really do your research on us and what we've done and what we stand for. Don't vote based on name recognition, which is what most people do because they don't know who we are unless you're down in the courts. But we have some people in this race who have recognizable names but don't practice law in our courts, and we need someone who's willing to and able to hit the ground running and capable and competent in doing their job.
Think about it. When you have an insurance case and you're faced with an insurance company that not only does not want to pay, but want to criminalize you in the process, and you want a judge who's reasonable and fair and understands what happens. Judge Kenneth King, go to the nonpartisan part of your ballot right away. And that's the one that's going to impact us on a day-to-day basis. Judge, thank you so much for being with us this morning.
Thank you for having me.
We appreciate you, and we wish you our very best.
Thank you so much.
We want to take a break, and we'll be back in the morning and in a moment, and we'll be talking with.
I won't be back with them, guys. I'm
Mrs.
sorry.
McGee Harvey, Leland McGee Harvey from Flint. So we'll be back in just a moment.